continuación tenemos a una gran invitada a quien estoy seguro vamos a aprenderle muchísimo. Around the world, disasters are becoming more frequent and severe. Kathleen Koch not only spent decades covering disasters as a CNN Washington correspondent, but she now leads a non-profit that helps elected leaders whose communities experience disaster. Learn the traits of a resilient community and what to put in place to improve your city's chances if a disaster does occur. Hear real-life hurdles that cities around the U.S. had to overcome in their journey back to a new normal. Finally, get tips on small changes during the recovery process that can make a big difference in your town's odds of surviving the next crisis. Kathleen, we're very excited to have you at this Smart City Expo Latam Congress in the context of COVID. Welcome.
Thank you, Hector. You know, building resilient communities, it's kind of like losing weight. Everyone wants the end result, but not necessarily the work required to achieve it. I'm a disaster expert, and I've seen that in working with communities, very often they seem to have so many other things that they need to focus on and spend money on until a disaster hits. But by then, it's too late. Now, as you mentioned, I was a CNN correspondent for 18 years, covered a lot of disasters all around the country, but it was really in 2005, when my hometown on the Mississippi Gulf Coast was destroyed by Hurricane Katrina, I became passionate about disaster prevention and recovery. I'd like to share with you just a couple of photos so you can see what we went through. So here are some waterfront businesses boarded up, ready for the storm. Oh, it didn't help. And here's a bed and breakfast that was in our town, just beautiful. Gone. Cute little kayak and bike shop before the storm. Nothing left. And this is the house at 956 South Beach Boulevard. I know it well. That's the house where I grew up. Gone. You know, humans are by nature optimistic creatures, and we never think that the worst, like this, is going to happen to us. So how do we overcome that and create resilience? Well, it starts by facing the facts. No community, no city is without risk. So as we talk about creating smart cities, resilience has to be the first priority and not the last. It has to be baked into everything we do. But I'm here to tell you that simple actions can have a lasting impact. Now, it starts by establishing your risk. A couple of years ago, I formed a nonprofit called Leaders Link, and what we do is harness and share elected officials' disaster lessons learned, and we use that to help other communities better prevent, respond to, and recover from similar crises. And what we tell elected leaders is that as soon as they are voted into office, they need to take a what-if tour with their emergency manager, or if they don't have one, with their police chief or their fire chief. And basically you drive around town and you try to imagine the unimaginable. So what if the bridge collapsed, or what if the chemical plant blew up, or what if a sinkhole swallowed City Hall? I mean, well, some people might applaud that, but seriously, then you have to make a plan. And I know that plans sound complicated and they're intimidating, but it's really as simple as figuring out, so if that happened, what would need to be done? Who has the skills and the resources to do it? How would you alert, organize, and then deploy them? And you write that down. Now, how soon do you have to do that? Yesterday. Hurricane Katrina was the worst natural disaster in U.S. history, and when it hit, 2 of the mayors on the Mississippi Gulf Coast had been in office 6 weeks, only 6 weeks. So in disasters, they don't care how long you have been in office. So also, smart cities, what you do is you drill. You drill and you practice. And when you have these drills, you don't involve just the city, you involve businesses, residents, even schools. Now, this is a junior high school in Kamaishi, Japan, right after, as it was being struck by that giant earthquake, that magnitude 9 earthquake in 2011. And as you can see, these students are evacuating. They're running for the hills. Also, elementary school students nearby saw that they were leaving. And all of this was happening because these junior high students had drilled. Also, residents from the town followed suit and they all ran to high ground. As a result, nearly 1,000 lives were saved that day. So drilling and practicing is so important. And if you've ever been through a disaster, you realize that the people around you, they are going to be the first responders in a disaster. So everyone has to be prepared. I know that when we talk about drilling and preparing, it's one thing if you have resources, but a lot of communities don't. So resilient communities have to be creative. So think about, is there a large business in town that could perhaps provide food if there was a disaster? Or maybe a church could double as a shelter in case of an emergency. Every community, either large or small, rich or poor, can pull together a network of non-governmental organizations in the community that could help if there was a disaster. And in the United States, we call those community organizations active in disaster. I am the chair of the one in our county, in Howard County, Maryland. And our members are nonprofits, they're faith-based groups, businesses, civic organizations, schools. And we came together because we'd had 2 very serious flash floods in our county. And we thought we'd be responding to something like that, but then the pandemic hit. And so we've been busy doing things like collecting food. As you can see here, we delivered food to poor communities in our county. We've given away about 90,000 kilograms of food to more than 23,000 people. We have nearly 100 volunteers who have spent countless hours, like these lovely ladies here, making face masks. We've given out about 19,000 of those. Some of our churches in their parking lots have held free COVID testing sites. And one of the really important things we've also done is we created a list of everything that the county would need during the disaster, during the pandemic, as well as a list of all of our 65 organizations and which of them could provide it. So that way, as soon as a need becomes apparent, we know who to contact and how to get the help out very quickly. So if there's a disaster, what do you think is the greatest predictor that a community will survive? Well, it's not the extent of the damage, and it's not even how wealthy the neighborhood is. Researchers say it's something called social capital, and that is how tight-knit the community is. So in other words, do you know your neighbor and they know you? Would you help each other? In times of trouble, would you rally to save your city? That's exactly what they did in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina in the tight-knit community of Village de l'Est. Now, it was a largely Vietnamese immigrant community. And all around the city, arguments were going on about this part of the city would come back, this part wouldn't. Well, these residents started to organize around their Catholic church because it was at the center of their community. They ended up coming back more quickly and more efficiently than other communities in New Orleans that had less damage and were more prosperous. And something interesting about these close community ties, they also say that they help protect residents' mental status after disasters, meaning that they are less liable to suffer from anxiety, from depression, and from PTSD. And I think that's because people know that they're not alone. Now, another really important factor during a disaster is good leadership, because how your leaders respond is very often going to be mirrored by the citizens, because perception is really reality. Now, this is our mayor, Eddie Favre of Bay St. Louis, and he seemed to know that. He just held the city together by the sheer force of his will. I was walking with him a month after the storm through downtown Bay St. Louis, and a woman in her 70s came up and gave him a big hug. And she said that she and her husband were back for a visit. And she said, "We are now residents of Charleston, South Carolina," at which point Eddie stopped her, wagging his finger, and no, you are visitors to Charleston, okay? Visitors. Eddie was constantly making it clear that Bay St. Louis would not die. He used to say, "We may not have houses, but everyone here has a home. And we may have lost everything, but we still have each other. And every day, as long as it's a little bit better today than it was yesterday, we're on the right track." So resilient communities have optimistic but honest leaders who were able to convince their citizens that better days really do lie ahead. You have to have a sense of humor if your community is going to survive a disaster well. In Latin America, do you have Yard of the Month awards like this? This is Houston, Texas, after Hurricane Harvey in 2017. It reminds me of signs that I saw on the Mississippi Gulf Coast after Hurricane Katrina that owners put on debris piles that used to be their houses. They said things like, "Dirt cheap waterfront fixer-upper," or "Please loot, it'll save us the trip." And these signs, they were like declarations to the world that the homeowners were not in despair and that they were not giving up and they would come back. And also laughter. It releases the feel-good hormone dopamine and it boosts our immune system. So laughter really is the best medicine. You may have heard the saying, "Only the strong survive." Well, that is not actually the case. Have you ever noticed after storms how often these giant trees with big, heavy trunks are the ones that topple first, whereas the more flexible, supple trees bend but don't break? Well, resilient communities learn how to flex and to adapt to the circumstances they find themselves in, and thus they recover more quickly. That was what Bay St. Louis did after Katrina. See, this was the bridge that used to connect our town to the rest of the Mississippi Gulf Coast. It's gone, but our residents quickly learned that right at the base of the bridge was the only place in town that you could get a cell phone signal out. So for months after the hurricane, if people wanted to make a phone call, they'd get in their cars and drive to the bridge. So they adapted as our main transportation artery became our communication artery. And so resilient communities learn that when a disaster hits, they embrace the wisdom of adapting and moving forward. And isn't that what we've all done since the pandemic hit? We have changed our behavior. I mean, because we had to, right? And you know, when you look around, you see the communities that have not adapted and haven't taken, you know, just simple measures like wearing masks, they're paying the price. Well, having a vision, having goals, that's so important when a community is destroyed by a disaster, as this Kansas town of Greensburg was 13 years ago. It was hit by an EF5 tornado. 13 people were killed and 95% of the city was destroyed, and residents were ready to leave because there was really nothing to stay for. But city leaders quickly put a clear vision on that clean slate, and they persuaded the residents to come back green. So Greensburg rebuilt as a green community. It has more LEED certified buildings per capita than any other city in the world. The entire city is powered by renewable energy like this. And this is the hospital, and it's the first hospital in the United States to use captured rainwater to flush the toilets. So this city is really a model for the United States, all because the leaders were able to convince the residents that there was this new green way of coming back. Well, if you're going to recover in a resilient way after a disaster, it really helps to have the buy-in of the citizens, because people will support what they help create. Punta Gorda, Florida discovered that after they were hit by a monster hurricane, Hurricane Charlie, in 2004, to really flatten much of the community. And right after the storm hit, people started, even before the power came back on, talking about how they wanted the city to look. And they formed a citizens recovery team called Team Punta Gorda. And about 10 days after the hurricane, they reached out to an urban planner to help them design a new city. And they had a really interesting rule. Everything would happen by unanimous consent. So this was not going to be easy. So they held meetings, they collected ideas, they shared the ideas, and they built support. And by the time they were done, they had a wonderful plan. And here was how it was executed. This is their new conference and event center. They have new hotels throughout the entire city, new restaurants. This is a beautiful bike and walking path that encircles the city. the economy there is booming. They have the tourism is up, property values are up. I mean, Punta Gorda.